So I did a book, as I discovered this over the years. My field is environmental literature. And so you'd think in that field there would be a great interest in the beauty of the environment. And there was when I initially got, a lot of us made the move out of postmodern, post-structural nonsense. We were done with that, and we went to sort of revisit the poetry and literature of the land and the sea. And then suddenly these other camps moved with us as we left. And so suddenly you have this terribly sort of politicized world that put beauty on its heels and ushered it out the door. So these are some of the things I want to raise today, what I consider to be a large corrosive will to disbelieve that's in our culture, which, as our previous speaker talked about, is related to beauty and belief. And this tendency that's in our culture. She talked about the way people talk and what's on people's shirts. There's this sort of scoffing cynicism and smugness, if you will. I have been guilty of it. You know, I was schooled, and she talked about our generation. She's talking about, she and I share that generation that brought this incredible sense of disbelief and cynicism and arrogance into our culture, if you will. So I just picked up a couple of slides in the last couple of days. This is an art educator on Twitter, and she tweeted this while this stuff's going on in Europe, that Vermeer began his art career when A, there was an economic crisis, a war, a plague, explosion that destroyed half the city of Delft. He kept painting. He also had and supported 14 children. The world has always been ending. Keep doing what you need to do. You don't run into that stuff on Twitter very often, you know. So I thought it was powerful, and it reminded me of what we were going to talk about today. My favorite poet, Robinson Jeffers, Northern California poet, said something very similar, that the world, yes, it's often a frightful place. To know this and know that however ugly the parts appear, the whole remains beautiful. This is what sort of captures me about Jeffers. No matter what's going on, World War I, he went through World War II, the rest of it, all the social upheavals in between in America, and he was totally focused on the fact that ultimately this thing adds up to beauty. And he wasn't going to be distracted from that, even though his other contemporaries were getting a little crazy in their voice and in their artistic behaviors. He asked himself, should my voice change in the manner of the recent young men into mere hysteria, splintered gleams, crackled laughter? You think about the fragmented line, some of the other interesting stuff going on in the early 20th century, but they are quite wrong. So he was interested in keeping composure, not being dissuaded from the beauty of the world and the beauty of existence, regardless of what was in front of him. And then, of course, I ran across this, and it was interesting. Our last speaker had something similar. I don't have such a powerful video, but in the midst of the worst things going on, some are tempted to act out. Some are tempted to lose faith. Some are tempted to abandon their sense of innocence and beauty in the world. And then you see this bomb shelter and this wonderful image. And of course, there was a video that came with this of this woman in Ukraine playing this violin in a bomb shelter. I have too many slides, by the way. I'll just tell you that ahead of time. But there's just so much. This I used in my last book because it was so beautiful. This woman on her way to hospice talked the ambulance driver into pulling over so she could see this ocean one last time. Now you tell me that those people who think that this is ephemeral, extra, in addition to the important things in life, she's dying. And what does she want? One more beautiful experience, right? So, sorry, I didn't get much sleep, so I'm a little weepy. Spent a lot of time at baggage claim last night because they lost my bag. This was briefly talked about. I didn't get there's a beautiful cover to this book, but there's a whole group of neurologists that have been able to see beauty, if that's what you need, in MRIs and other sorts of things, where the brain lights up like a Christmas tree, given the right stimulation, a beautiful landscape, et cetera. So again, not subjective, but quite endemically there and a part of us and verifiable. There are some incredible pieces of literature validating this experience that we share. Walter Pater in his big book, Renaissance, and the conclusion, every moment some form grows perfect in hand or face. Some tone on the hills or the sea is choicer than the rest. I love that line. The last graduate seminar, I repeated that line all the way through the semester, that there's some tone on the hills or the sea that's choicer than the rest. My last slide, I'm going to give, if I ever get there, is Robinson Jeffers saying, and what will we have after all the disappointments, the imbecility, the betrayals, but to have admired the beauty? But to have admired the beauty. And so when you see this statement that there's always some tone on the hills, I don't know about you, but when I'm driving in a car on a trip, I'm a pointer. It annoys my wife to no end. Look at that. Look at the way the light is cascading across that. Look at that. But I mean, this is what it's made out of for me, is these intense moments of immediacy that we capture these moments. And I always play for my younger undergraduates the John Mayer song, Clarity. I don't know, it's kind of your generation, maybe some of you, where he's talking about, there's this, I woke up this morning and things were just clear. And this moment, I know it couldn't last, but I was hanging on to it, and I was trying to get everything out of it that I could, and it's not supposed to, which is part of what makes it so precious and wonderful. This is Walter Pater in the late 19th century talking about the same thing, that we only get a counted number of pulses that are given to us in a variegated and dramatic life. So how do we see all that's to be seen? With the finest senses. Of course, now we have problems with that language. What problems do we have in today's politically charged discussions in the classroom about beauty and art? What do you mean? Whose finest senses? Who are you to define finest senses? It could be this, could be that. So we deconstruct the phrase, right, or the concept. But Pater was wonderful. To burn always with this hard gem-like flame, to maintain this ecstasy, that is success in life. Powerful. There's a couple of pages that I encourage you to get a hold of in the conclusion to the Renaissance, that it just goes on like this. And, any student is going to be captivated and won over by such a thing. But I mentioned this I'm not going to read this Henry James Art of Fiction, but I mean, when you talk about these things that we, like in the last talk, mentioned, that are kind of universal to us all, you get these questions: whose experience? What about the class issues, race issues? Whose consciousness, gender issues? Whose mind? Who defines, etc.? So we have this, and that's fine. Questions are great. It depends about the intention of the question. Is the intention of the question to clarify, to deepen the topic, or is it to simply cause trouble? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. When I got excited, because I was trying to recover from my doctoral work, which was all postmodern, post-structural linguistics, Derrida, the rest of it, which took me years. As I moved into the PhD, I went, what is this? And nobody said, well, let's talk about it. There weren't any choices. You will read this and you will excel, or you don't get through, right? But then finally I started seeing this stuff. This was 1998, when in the Chronicle of all places, Getting Tired of Cultural Studies, some scholars rediscover beauty. Hey, look what we found. It didn't go anywhere. We stopped talking about it in literary studies. So I was very excited about this. He called it the forbidden subject. This is the forbidden subject. And some of us, even in this room, probably don't know to the degree to which this is happening in higher ed. It just went away, and it shall not be mentioned. My PhD student who came to me a couple years ago wanted to write about beauty. He goes, but I can't mention it in front of all my other professors. Will you help me? because he saw the book I'd just written. And we put together a committee and whatnot, and it was interesting. It was a battle to get that dissertation topic approved, to get it written, and to get it through this committee, because they were not going to have it. That's the battle. And that's what's so important about this work, ground-up work that's taking place with these young kids that we saw in the morning, and the work that you do all the time. So here's the result. I got this publication from University of Michigan. Anybody from University of Michigan? I ran into somebody yesterday. It was an alumni newsletter, and it was called, up there in the upper right-hand corner, On Beauty. And I went, oh my God, this is wonderful. Finally, somebody's talking about this in my field. So I turned to the first article. It was written by all the faculty members and went out to graduates. She confessed, I mean, it was a short little couple pages for each professor, that she understands Ashbery's discomfiture with mentioning beauty in 1977, which is something she resonates with today. She says, I don't talk about it in class. There's no single situation or aesthetic that could speak for everyone. And that, to assume otherwise, is to flex your privilege. Look at what we've done to people in the classroom. She's afraid of talking about beauty because we've told her to doubt herself and the topic and the conversation that might happen afterwards. You don't have to be doctrinaire. You don't have to be authoritative about this topic. You simply have to ask people, what is your sense of beauty? Do you find this passage beautiful? Do you find this painting beautiful? Why? But this is how bad it's gotten. She's doubting herself. She's doubting the topic. She has none of the faith that we heard about and the courage that we heard about in our last speaker. She doesn't discuss it at all. She won't even say what poems interest her. She says they're all interesting. Look at the flattening here, right? Nothing in that class is going to go, oh my God, look at this line. Read this line. Some tone of the hills or the sea is choicer than the rest. None of that excitement's going to happen. They're all equal. She confesses that her professional positioning doesn't square with her personal experience. She uses social media, posts pictures of stunning light on sea coasts. She took a photo of a manhole cover dusted in snow last winter, which she could only claim is beautiful. Oh, but I am suspicious of those posts and tastes and the stories they tell about me. This is the corrosiveness that's seeped into the arts. The doubt here is fundamentally undermining to the point where she's dysfunctional. So I said, oh, well, that's the first article. It can't be that bad, right? I mean, it was all of... So I turned to the last one, and it was Nick Hart. Nick Harp confesses, and here we go. He is anxious in my own teaching about making room for my students to apprehend literary beauty. He resists engaging with the topic in class because I worry that I will seem insubstantial or effete. I hope I'll have the guts to say the word beautiful in and out of my classes. And in my book, I simply said, I hope he will as well. I don't get it. I mean, this is coming from their educational processing, right? The way they were certified in their studies. But right around the turn of the century, all this marvelous stuff started happening. A.O. Scott writes in the New York Times, beauty is back. We discovered it, right? But he says, for at least 100 years, art has defined itself less by the pursuit of beauty than by suspicion of it. For 100 years, pretty much since Marshal Duchamp brought his toilet out and plunked it on that platform and said, behold. I loved my art history classes. And I knew it was my job to get with it, to like stuff initially sort of hit me. Remember she talked about children have these instincts, these intuitions about beauty and what they like. And certainly education is supposed to challenge us as individuals, but not reduce us, not to wash us out, not to erase, not to affirm. And yet that's, so some of the stuff that I was taught to be clever about and sophisticated about and knowledgeable about, finally now that I'm old and I don't care, I'm going, I really hate that. I don't like that. I love this. Well, yeah, but you're not supposed to like that because you'll end up feeling like Nick Harp, insubstantial. Can you imagine this? He resists talking. I worry I will seem insubstantial. I hope I'll have the guts to say the word beautiful in class. University of Michigan professor. You're doing incredible work. You're on the front lines. So anyway, this is a long article by Scott in the New York Times. And he ends up by saying, the recent art that has received the most attention. Now, my point in my talk, in my book, is I don't care what people do. You want to, I won't mention some of the stuff Mapplethorpe did and whatnot. You want to do some of this stuff, can it, put it in the Smithsonian, fine. I'm interested in what has dominated art for so many years. The recent art that has received the most attention, which challenges the traditional canons of beauty and which at times challenges its audience's ability not to flinch. But we're told if you're going to be cool, if you're going to be on the trendy edge, you have to say interesting things about this. So this is a great painting by Mark Henson because the lights are not really helping out here, but it's called Paintbrush Warrior. And so it helped me sort of ask the question that is at the center of my book, is art a way to cover up the ugliness and truth of the world, which is the Marxist complaint, the left-wing complaint, or does it actually heal? Does it actually replace the ugly with something more beautiful, more hopeful? And that's the tension that's at play. And so how did we get here? Some modernist attitudes, techniques, abandoning representation, political insistence on turning art into a social and political tool, and frankly, throughout the 20th century, a growing, crippling nihilism and relativism. Again, pluralism is quite different, isn't it? Pluralism, let's consider all the questions. Let's have the conversation about what is good, what is beautiful, what is true. But all the answers won't be equally true. Who said they taught logic and rhetoric? Aaron, right? That's what that's for. But now we've got to a point where, let's ask all the questions and all the answers they're all cool, man. My generation did that to us. Whatever you're into, who am I to judge? We've short-circuited our ability to say certain kinds of affirmative things about the world and about the art that we look at. Frederick Turner, whom you hopefully saw last night while I was in baggage claim. God, I used to teach his stuff. I love his poetry. Heroes, what a great poem, Valediction. But he's writing in 1985, and he's getting pretty excited because he thinks in natural classicism, he's thinking that the return of aesthetics is happening because the reductionist Marxist theory is collapsing. The old socioeconomic theories which dismissed aesthetics as merely a superstructure designed to justify and rationalize economic power. So if you don't know how base and superstructure work, it's important to realize that the Marxist view is if your economy, it was an economic-based theory, right? If your economy was capitalism, which is by nature defined by Marxists as unjust, some have more than others, you can't have that. So everything that economy produces, the religions, the social institutions, the education, the art, it will be saturated with that injustice. Lately we've been hearing a term, systemic injustice. Everywhere, wall to wall, no relief. That's where that comes from. It's a judgment about the very foundation of your culture as being unjust, and so everything that gets produced. So what do you do as a critic or a political activist or as an artist? You scoff at and make fun of everything that culture produces because the foundation, the engine, is corrupt and unjust. Now, what happened after the USSR collapsed is that the new left came about, Marcuse and the Frankfurt School, and they changed out, because we were kicking them, right? Economically, we were clearly the world of freedom and opportunity and innovation. We got problems. But their kind of centralized economic game fell apart. But the left didn't give up. The new left came in and they changed out the economic base with race, gender, class, environment, anything else they could weaponize to have the same kind of attack on culture. We see it now every day in the news. Right? The new base. Now, this is not to say that, again, as our last speaker said, I mean, our culture's got plenty of problems. Do you fix them? Or is your attitude, can we take this aside and with our Aaron's rhetoric and logic and our belief, can we fix these things one at a time? Or do we just want to burn it all down? The famous literary theorist Terry Eagleton, who almost every undergraduate has his book on literary theory, is a Marxist from Britain. And his philosophy is that we need to, the vision of the future is the failure of the present. Think about that for a minute. The vision of the future is the failure of the present. So you're not just going to try to fix one of those things if you see a problem, write a bill, adjust the way things happen. You need it all to go. It needs all to go. And you need to change out that base. I spent too much time there, sorry. So cultural scoffing. If you believe in the economic base, then the everyday life is saturated with the effects of commodification. My generation was, oh, that's commercial. Oh, they're selling this, and that's bad. And we had this real problem with profit, which meant, ambition, which means I made something wonderful. Do you want to buy it? Oh, that was bad, my generation. So the base changes, as I said before, change out the economic issue because that got beaten. You replace it with the new agenda of opposition. This is what it was called. So a lot of refusal. If you buy this base superstructure assessment of culture, you will attack all manifestations of that culture. I hope that's clarifying for you when you listen to the news and see this senator or that congressperson talk this way or that way. It's not that problem that they're trying to fix. It's the whole thing. They want the whole thing gone. And frequently, this takes place at the world of art, too. It gets negotiated there. Elaine Scarry, great book, 1999, recommended highly, on beauty and being just. She changes this whole argument out. She goes, no, it's not that. We've got the base wrong. Beauty is the foundation. Beauty is the base. And if we don't start there, everything else gets ugly. That's how it gets ugly. So 2 decades is carried out by a set of political complaints against it. And what are those complaints? That beauty distracts attention. Back to my paintbrush warrior, right? Is he painting over? Look at this pretty stuff. Don't look at the ugliness. Is he painting over what we should look at? Or is he offering beauty and a life of beauty structured by beauty as an alternative to what we see on the t-shirts and coming out of the mouths of our young people, as Carol was mentioning. She offers that beauty provides the pressure of the distributional. If you have an experience with beauty, you want to share it, you want to grow it, you want to protect it. And of course, it all started many decades ago before Elaine Scarry's writing. You've got the Russian formalists in the 30s saying things can't be just aesthetic. Things can't be just beautiful. They have to actually serve the social demand of the moment. So that's what's happened. So if you turn literature or art into a political program that either serves or doesn't serve the agenda, what does it become? It's become Soviet realism, right? And it's not even art anymore. It's public policy. My field, literature and the environment, if you look at what the papers presented now, are about fracking and about everything but literature and art. It's incredible. And artists also, artists who are in the know. Here's this Snodgrass poem from the 50s. And it's actually a wonderfully written poem. But it's playing into this game. A troop ship coming back from World War II into San Francisco. And they sail by Alcatraz. And look at this, Alcatraz, lavender with flowers. So you got a prison that's pretty, that's beautiful. It's a deception. Like the whole culture I'm moving back into is a prison. Because like Alcatraz, he looks back at the Golden Gate Bridge and it's bars, just like a prison cell. Barred, the Golden Gate fading away astern, stood like the latched gate of your own backyard. So you just came back to the country you fought for, and you're calling it a prison, a terrible thing to be subjected to. So again, I'm jumping around a little bit. It started early 20th century, the Dadaists, after Marcel Duchamp and his Fountain came out. You've got Tristan Tzara. The whole point is the beautiful and the true in art do not exist. Everything happens in a completely idiotic way. See, now I opened up with the woman at the violin in the bunker, hanging on to beauty. These are people who lose their composure. Everything's crazy. Everything's ugly, so I'm going to do ugly things in the name of honesty. Nothing is more delightful than to confuse and upset people. Scruton, she mentioned Scruton. He talks about modernism being this kind of provocative thing. And provocation is great. Getting people to think is great. Intention, are you just trying to make people crazy? Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, said, we don't want to talk about problems to solve with people. We just want to upset them to the point where they rebel. There's a kind of person afoot amongst us. I mean, Kaczynski wasn't a Marxist. He was just kind of mean and angry and bitter, crazy. So the things that we've loved, home, peace, beauty, contentment, these are all lies. My generation loved making fun of Leave It to Beaver. Those kind of corny, innocent shows, and we all spend a lot of time in our lives looking more sophisticated and cool than that. The darker the series could become, the better, the more real it was. But here's something interesting that happened. Now, this was an interesting innovation and experiment in art where we moved from beauty to the sublime. What's beauty? Classically defined, beauty has a figurative quality to it. It's a landscape like the Richard Thorne painting down below, where the sublime was about the mind. Figurative things can't contain the individual. And so you get this abstract sublime. So interesting, but it became sort of all-consuming for the 20th century, didn't it? And I got a tape at the end that I want to show you. It really illustrates this. This is Turner's painting, 1842. You see the snowstorm starting to... So the background is beginning to come into the foreground and overwhelm what was the foreground, as this one critic suggests. In fact, Frederick Monk's Monk by the Sea, David Frederick's Monk by the Sea, is not that far off from a Rothko. Just take the monk out, and you can barely see the monk, and in this light, you probably can't eat it. I don't know, see him down there. But you get this weird, it was interesting for me to think about the background was becoming the foreground. So we were losing perspective, we were losing people going about their business, and then finally Rothko's masterpiece was, forget the two colors, right? We'll just go to one. Well, where do you go from there? I got some pictures in here about, the guy's got 3 canvases and he's hitting all 3 with paint. And then finally an artist just pouring the paint right on himself. I mean, and it goes on, right? And it's not to say there isn't a serious version of this that actually produces things that I would have on my wall, but there's a kind of scoffing cynicism behind too much of it. And you'll see it in the last tape I'll show you. And it had a parallel with what was going on in language studies. With deconstruction, post-structure, the rest of it was separating the signifier from the signified. Language was just over here and the world was over here. And with the art movement, right, the art piece was what was on the canvas. The canvas was the focus. You don't represent the world anymore. It's this thing, this autotelic, isolated art object. And so there was this great cartoon in my field. A couple of professors, I'd forgotten how non-textual nature could be. This is how obsessed we became with language after Derrida and those folks. And the critic. What happened to the critic? Myra Jelen, who was a leftist, said, oh my God, my job now is to expose the misrepresentations and false ideals of everything I read, to strip away the lie and expose the liar. This is an ambiguous mission for a literary critic who becomes an adversary of the work he or she analyzes. This is what we do in language studies now. We turn out legions of students who suspect they're paranoid. Power's everywhere, evil's everywhere. My job is to undo it, unpack it, shatter it, make it, come to its knees over and over again. There's nothing you find that you love. There's nothing that you find that you want to memorize. There's just things to take apart. Peter, I can't pronounce his last name. Anybody that's got a good German background here? Okay, you're with me then. He says there's something really screwed up about a culture in which the value of beauty becomes controversial or not talked about. It's about a stubborn grievance. My Terry Eagleton friend who wants to burn up everything and change the world, right? Because nothing's good enough the way it is. Or benumbed insensibility. Robinson Jeffers, my hero, wrote this great poem. Here's a guy fighting this battle in 1958. He was fighting it since 1922, where he says, yesterday's sundown was very beautiful. But look at this. I know it is out of fashion to say so. And I think we are fools to turn away from the superhuman beauty of the world and dredge our own minds. So if you think about abstract painting, which became about the artist, right? You need a little note next to it, or preferably the artist. Well, what I was doing, that's dredging our own minds. So he announces in 1922, this is his his method and philosophy. The poet is not to make beauty, but to herald beauty, to announce it. Look at how he's injecting humility into that. And beauty is everywhere. What a profound way to begin your poetic career. I'm not here to make it. I'm not this God. I'm here to announce it. He's a pointer too, like me, driving my wife crazy on a trip. Love the Wild Swan, no time for that. 1938, well, it's a wonderful poem where he says, I can't really get a hold of the world. This wild swan of a world is no hunter's game. At least, he says in that last line, love your eyes that can see, your mind that can hear the music, the thunder of the wings. Love the wild swan. So he's saying, this attempt to represent this world is too much. So he's talking in 1938 about what I've been talking about, the modernist notion that forget representation, forget nature at all, dredge your own mind, and have art produce its own forms. Here's this one. Now, this is what, poets keep doing this. They keep ignoring this corrosive stuff. Here's Mary Oliver. I do not know exactly what prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Well, my friend Terry Eagleton has an answer. That whole world you just created, Mary, it's an idealized refuge, an isolated enclave. It's a made-up place, a fairyland for people who live in this terrible competitive world and need a place to go. So I'm going to skip, because I'm getting a sense of time. How much time do I have, do you think?
What time are you supposed to end?
What's that?
What time are we supposed to end? 13 minutes.
Okay, good. So, in my own field, this literature and the environment where we left Derrida and the trace and post-structuralism behind, we went back to nature writing, and we wanted to reread Thoreau and all these people who have now been all discredited. Thoreau's an elitist who went off by himself instead of working with the community, which is a lie. He worked with abolitionists and feminists and whatnot out in his little cabin, but no. That being said, John Muir, the great poet and writer about the California woods, you know, we need beauty and we need bread. They're not mutually exclusive things. He's been discredited as some sort of European this and that. So you see this corrosiveness again. I mean, Buell started this whole field. He was interested in rediscovering the beauty of nature, and he wrote about the wild and the beautiful. And then there was this shift, and you can see it in one of his books where he goes after America the Beautiful and calls it a mindless paean to westward expansion. He ignores Catherine Bates, the English teacher who actually went up to the top of Pikes Peak and saw this incredible waves of purple grain, this majesty. Did I get that wrong? I'm getting a little tired.
I don't know that the grain was purple.
Yeah, waves of, yeah, it's that 4.5 hours of baggage. I mean, having an effect. Did I have any of that down here? Anyway, you know we have all kinds of people. I mean, we sing it at a lot of football games, and a lot of stars from Hollywood sing it, etc. But in English studies, suddenly we couldn't just admire nature, and the problem now, it was just not nature was being called beautiful, but America too, and that's a real problem in my field, right? What does he call it? He actually says it commits a felony. My field has become very enamored with policing language. One of their favorite words is, we don't interpret things, we interrogate them. And you saw Myra Jelen complaining about what her job was. Expose the liar, reveal the lie. This is cultural sickness, folks, which no pressure, you're here to heal in your jobs. And that's what the message from our last speaker was as well. Well, here we see Julie Maharu fixes the felony. She takes a wonderful painting by Albert Bierstadt about the Sierras. And she is given a church, a decommissioned Catholic church in New York. She paints 2 commissioned canvases from the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, biggest canvases in Western painting history. 27 feet high, 32 feet wide. In other words, larger than Leonardo's Last Supper or Raphael's The School of Athens. They're humongous. She takes Bierstadt's painting, this beautiful painting of the Sierras and the light in the Sierras, and finds this is a felony as well. It's a problem. How does beauty become a problem? Well, and she goes after it. Here we see her figuring out what her approach is going to be. Here she is working her magic with an elevator in this beautiful Catholic church with flying buttresses and whatnot, but we have this. Here's the, and then here are the installations in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art on both sides, and you know, the applause and whatnot that happened when they went up was, okay, so when I show you this little tape, recall Jeffers' dredge our minds comment, recall the fact she says she's going to invent something instead of Jeffers' heralding beauty. Note the attempt to negate, which is Marcuse's phrase, that the artist in the 60s, your job is to negate. And certainly Rothko's black canvas is a negation. It's like somebody did something terrible to your window. You will see nothing and you will be happy. So that we have here. Note the beautiful flying buttresses, except note the hypocrisy between she can't look at any landscape without seeing crimes having been committed on that landscape. And yet at the end, I just took out a couple of clips of a longer video, but listen to what she says about the San Francisco coastline at the end. See if it's jarring for you as it is for me. So here we go. Tell me if that's coming out of it. Yeah?
There is no such thing as just landscape. The actual landscape is politicized through the events that take place on it. And I don't think it's possible for me in general to ever think about the American landscape without thinking about the colonial history and the colonial violence of that narrative.
Here's Dad's painting behind us.
It's the representations of American landscape painting. And specifically, when I came back, I kept thinking about the Hudson River Valley school painters, like Edward Church, Thomas Cole, Bierstadt, because they really encapsulate that idea of going westward. I started to layer the mark. There's this desire of trying to invent something. At a certain point, I wanted to bring elements of the underpainting to the surface so that it further complicated spatially how you were seeing these.
And this one connects to 45.
When you're looking at these paintings, they're not graspable. They're the discomfort of being a person living and working in the United States is a place that I think these paintings were being made from. There's this grandeur to the coast and the way the coast reaches the ocean, and when you're driving through the Bay Area, it's just majestic.
What? What? I got to the end of the tape, I went, what? I thought you can't look at the landscape without seeing the felonies. I mean, I'm thinking, where's that painting? That's the one I want. The grandeur. That's just me. But notice what we have here, right? We have this notion that the world is ugly, therefore my art will be ugly. And anything you produce that's beautiful, I'm going to do bad things to it. Scoff at it, deconstruct it, talk about how naive it is, talk about how you're really not paying attention. You ever see that bumper sticker, if you're happy, you're not paying attention? There's people who, in fact, Marcuse said it, the artist has to be the most alienated person in the country. Even though he may live in a land, or she may live in a land of plenty, where there's kind of a harmonizing pluralism, these are his words. You still have to stir the anger, stir the, crap. Right? If you're happy, you're not paying attention. So you have to stay miserable, and you have to make other people miserable. And you do it by taking down beauty. So, questions? Yes?
Is that an actual Bierstadt that she defaced the actual painting, or did she put
No.
something over the?
Yeah, she can't. That was not the original. The original is sitting in the tape.
Okay, yeah, that's That's what I thought.
Yeah, but I mean, if she could, she'd probably. And let me point out that Julie Maru moved to Michigan with her parents. She was like 7. She's from Ethiopia. A terrible socialist government had taken over, brutal, whatnot, and they were swept out of there. And Dad got a job at Michigan State teaching economics. And Mom ran a Montessori school, and she went to expensive art schools in New York and hates living here. It's painful. It's painful to see this kind of, this bitterness, this anger, because, and Myra Jelen, and in Julie Myra's defense, it's a culture. I mean, you can talk to almost any graduate student in the United States now in literary studies, and you'll get this kind of, things are all bad. There's nothing to love. You can't affirm anything you read. You've got to be against it. The text has to be held under a spotlight and interrogated because it's produced by the base, right? So inside it is all kinds of felonies, injustices, shortcomings. You can love nothing. And James Hillman, who, like I said, I had about 3,000 slides, said,
You still have 20. You still have 20.
that's okay, I need to probably stop talking. I will tell you this, though. Here's what's going on. And I don't know how to pronounce this. There are great, you're great. This conference is great because it's moving in the other direction. It's pushing back. And this other article I ran into, this is 2018, a resurgence of art. I don't know, do you know how to pronounce this? There's somebody in the conference here that's speaking from this group. I think it might be this group, Atliers. Is that close enough for? I'll tell you. So a resurgence of art is in the art world toward exalting excellence and beauty. So they're in a funny position of having distinguished themselves from those whose works need written explanations. These artists value, I love this, sincerity instead of cynicism. Robinson Jeffers looks at a flock of pelicans cruising across the sea in front of his house in Carmel, and he says, nature going about its business with a beautiful earnestness that's as incredible as the planets in their cycle. There's this earnestness. I mean, he loved the Northern California coast because it was melancholy and wistful, and there was a sense of deepness in the way the light, sort of the way Julie feels about the grandeur of the coast up there, but she won't paint that. But this notion of sincerity over cynicism, this is about the heart, isn't it? This is about, if I can borrow some of the language from Carol, this is about the soul, this is about the spirit. And we're asked, this is a culture that's in trouble when it gives itself over to the cynicism and the corrosiveness and the willingness to disbelieve anything and everything and refuse to affirm. Poor Myra Jelen says, I have to be antagonistic to everything I come in contact with. That's my job now as a critic. Sincerity over cynicism. As a result of this approach, an ironic twist of history occurs, with these artists being perhaps the most radical and marginalized group of artists living today. So when Marcel Duchamp came out with the urinal, it was wild stuff. It was provocative. They were on the margin, on the edge, and then they became everything. And now these guys are out on the margin. Like the Christians in the catacombs. People finding a place to sort of give rebirth. I mean, that's why I called it the return of the repressed. And these artisans are not embarrassed to utter the word beautiful at a time when that word is generally scorned. by the contemporary art establishment. So, Jeffers, this is the quote I started with, actually. And this, oh yeah, don't you love that? When Siri starts talking to you. It's fine. I do it all the time. In fact, Siri records me sometimes and then sends the text when I'm just having a conversation with somebody. You have that yet? Isn't that fun? And this is bitter counsel, but required and convenient. For beyond the horror, when the imbecility and the betrayal and the disappointments become apparent, what will you have but to have admired the beauty? Some tone on the hills, some tone on the sea. These are the things that make it worthwhile for me. And as opposed to Gillian White, I would share those things in my classroom, certainly be open to discussion. But if your students don't see you in love with the world, what have we given them? Right? That terrible, I mean, I led with her because it's so painful to listen to her say how she chokes herself off, polices herself, and yet wants her children to experience beautiful things, but not her students. That's too dangerous in the field now. I mean, a decent educator would say, you know, in a graduate course, why is this concept so troubling? Why is it hard for us to talk about beauty? Well, certainly part of what the 60s exposed, it was part of, you know, a feminist rejection of being objectified and things like that. So there's legitimate stuff, but even then, I got a part of my book where I talk about Gloria Steinem, who's still kind of dealing with the fact that she was called the pretty one by other feminists, you know. So she was trying to play that down, you know, I got rid of makeup, I wore my pajamas or whatever. But this kind of leveling that started in the 60s, where we don't want anybody standing out, we're seeing that come full forward now. Full forward now. This says end, but apparently I have more time, so. So here's Marcuse, the New Left, Frankfurt School. Art's seeming inherent ability to please is something to be regarded with the utmost suspicion. Okay, I realize this is verging on repetition, but I think you really need to understand how widespread in philosophy and in art and politics this notion, if you're happy, you're not paying attention. And yet you see the woman playing the violin in the bunker in Ukraine. I think she's paying attention. She's not happy. Jeffers' sense of beauty wasn't some pretty little, you know, fairy tale emoji or, you know, we tend to think beauty, that's why Nick Harp is afraid of being seen as a feat. Well, if I like beauty, people think I'm shallow and I'm light. Jeffers' sense of beauty was what produces beauty is the waves crashing on his Northern California coast, or, you know, his brother was an astronomer, the galaxy expanding, red shift, stars exploding. I mean, when this is a universe under pressure, and that's, you know, and he built his house on the Carmel coast out of huge granite boulders that he rolled up from the water, and he says, you know, these are the bones of the mother. You know, this is the molten mass that was here before it all cooled, and I'm going to surround myself with this beautiful stuff, because beauty is in the very grain of the granite. It's everywhere.